Over the years, side quests to obtain legendary Pokémon have varied significantly from game to game. In some cases, they're as simple as they were in Generation 1. You go to a location and catch the Pokémon. In others, they're a bit more complex, requiring the solving of puzzles, collection of items, and use of specific Pokémon. I have always enjoyed the more specific and varied quests, as I feel that they build in a great sense of mystery and mythology into the games, and change the tone of the gameplay completely. Today, I'd like to talk about what I think is the absolute pinnacle of this kind of more varied quest, the legendary giants, or the Regis. I'll start with a basic explanation for those who haven't done it in a while or aren't familiar. There are 3 legendary golem Pokémon in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald that you can catch after completing a quest. This quest can be started as soon as the player has access to the HMs required to access the sealed chamber, an underwater cave. Once in the chamber, you complete a puzzle which unlocks the caves where the Regis are residing. The player then needs to travel to each cave, complete a puzzle in each, and then can encounter and catch the Regis. It's pretty simple on paper, but there's so many different little details that make it much more than the sum of its parts. Let's start by talking about the requirements to complete the quest. You need a Relicanth, a Whale Lord, a Pokemon that knows Dig, access to the HMs Surf, Dive, and depending on which version of the game you are playing, Flash, Rock Smash, Strength, and Fly. Getting the HMs and the TM for Dig are very simple, and getting Relicanth and Whale Lord are not. Getting Whale Lord is more annoying than it is difficult, as you have a couple of terrible options. Catch a Whalmer and level it to level 40 so it evolves, or grind for a 1% Surf encounter on Route 129. Worth noting here that you can fish up Whalmers above level 40 on that route, but doing so can take quite a bit of time. You might think leveling a Whalmer doesn't sound that bad, but unfortunately Whalmer kinda sucks, and level 40 isn't trivial, so it can take some time. Relicanth, on the other hand, sounds like an urban legend that your playground friend told you about. Yeah, if you dive around Sutopolis and hang around there getting encounters for 3 hours, a really old fish will appear. It just doesn't really stack up. Every time I've done this quest and had to catch a Relicanth, it has always taken an eternity to appear. Because of this, I naturally assumed that it was a 1% encounter, but it's actually a 5% encounter. It feels like a 1% encounter, partially I think because the encounter rate in the underwater grass is lower, and you move more slowly underwater. Getting these 2 Pokemon is the first and probably least esoteric step of completing the quest. Your next step is to access the sealed chamber where the main puzzle is set up. The overworld entrance to the sealed chamber is in one tiny little dive spot in the middle of Route 134, which is almost impossible to stumble upon, given that you have to take a very specific path to get to it. A lone patch of water with only 2 tiles of access, all others pushing you out of the way and sending you to Slateport. NPCs in Pacifidlog don't mention the access here, with one vaguely hinting about being swept away somewhere else due to the fast currents. However, it sticks out in the very isolated part of the map that it sits in. This does not mean that it is easy to access. Players trying to get there will immediately find that they're flying back to Pacifidlog or saving and resetting several times after taking the wrong path through the currents. It is deliberately difficult to access and rewards the player for seeking it out. After taking the right path, you can dive down to the ocean floor to find out what the heck is going on here. This is where things really start ramping up in terms of intrigue and mystery. I want to spend some dedicated time talking about how insane I think the inclusion of braille in these puzzles is. You encounter it right away in the dive spot, where you can surf down and find a dot inscription telling you to go up here. This one isn't really hard to figure out, given that going up is a pretty natural instinct when you're underwater. Returning to the surface on any tile except the tile with the braille text on it returns you to Route 134, not the sealed chamber. The remainder of the braille puzzles are not even remotely intuitive without using the cipher included with certain copies of the games. Without the cipher, how would a child figure out that you need to use dig on the wall in the interior sealed chamber to access the next room? How would you know that you need to have a Relicanth and a Whale Lord of all Pokémon in your party in specific positions for the 3 caves to be unlocked, unless you could decode the braille? This is not a criticism at all. I love this, and I think it's completely nuts. I am personally a very big fan of the wholly esoteric and bizarre approach that they took here. It's also really funny that they chose to use Braille of all coding or language systems for the puzzle here, precisely because it is a tactile communication form, meaning it functions by physical touch to impart information. There is absolutely zero way to touch the Braille in the video game here. They were obviously very aware of this when they put it in the games, otherwise they wouldn't have included the decoding document in the copies of those games. Still, they saw a tactile language and said, yes, put it in the video game, where no one will ever be able to feel it. It gets funnier when you learn that they didn't actually include the Braille decoding cipher in North American releases of the games, meaning if you were in those countries, the only way to access this information was from fledgling game FAQ forums or buying a separate guidebook that did include them. This is just a really strange choice, given that it was included in every other release of the games. It's not an issue where they forgot it in early releases of the games. Ruby and Sapphire released in Japan 4 months before they did in North America, and those editions included the cipher. In the Ruby and Sapphire manuals, there was a vague hint that the player might encounter some puzzles that might not be intuitive, and that it might be Braille. Instead of just having the Braille cipher, it just told you to contact Nintendo for help, because it's a benevolent and consumer-friendly organization. Given the opportunity to include the cipher in later releases such as Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald, they instead chose to remove this hint from the manual altogether. This is all incredibly funny to me, and is probably the most Game Freak coded thing to do in the history of Game Freak. I also have a hard time believing that many children genuinely sat there with their Game Boys in hand, manually and tediously decoding a Braille message using a written document included, or not, in their game. It just does not strike me as something that kids would really want to do all that much. I'm sure some nerdier, dorkier kids probably did, but it would seem more likely to me that this information was probably decoded by a small number of people, who then spread it around by word of mouth in playgrounds and through internet forums. Personally, I got a second-hand copy of Pokémon Ruby as a kid that did not include a case or a manual, and I actually don't remember how I found out how to catch the Reggies. I probably looked it up on the internet. The good thing is that the kids who did spend the time decoding the Braille were rewarded in a way that you probably wouldn't have been if you just googled the solutions. There is a poem in the Braille code that has nothing to do with the functions of the caves, and is there purely for storytelling and world building. This ode of sorts refers to the ancient people who lived in the chamber, and how they sealed away the Pokémon. If the player has courage and hope, they should open a door and meet the eternal Pokémon. I think this short writing has so much effect, especially if you are decoding it piece by piece. It gives some nice context to the whole quest. It also sets up the later quest to catch Regigigas nicely. However, you would completely miss this if you haphazardly googled how to catch the Reggies in 2004. After you, a non-North American, manually decode the Braille puzzles using the included cipher, you would be able to put Whale Lord in the first slot of your party and Relicanth in the last slot, and click the text in the top of the room. There's a moment of silence, and then rumbling. You learn that a door has opened far away, probably. At this point, the player still has absolutely no clue where the door opened, but something is open somewhere, and somehow you need to find it. For the desert ruins, it's very possible that a player having not explored the region all that much may have found it anyway, and realized that the pattern of stones around the ruins is the same as that in the sealed chamber, and they would head there. But some pretty thorough exploration is required to find the island cave, and to a lesser extent the ancient tomb. They're quite out of the way, and have only the pattern of 6 rocks to indicate that there's something related in there. Outside of each chamber is a ruin maniac who hints at there being something hidden nearby, even when the doors are not open yet, which helps a bit, but still requires the player to actually battle the ruin maniac to get this information. I think this is all very, very cool. Given that this is an optional quest to catch legendary Pokémon, the bar should be very high for the exploration effort required to find them. In other contexts, particularly if they were required for story progression, this would be too difficult. It would be disproportionate to the rewards. But in this context, where it is entirely optional and the reward is pretty great, I think it works exceptionally well. It's also worth noting at this point that this is a multi-stage quest, and while catching the Reggies themselves is great, so much of the fun is in the process of finding the right Pokemon, going to the obscure location, decoding the oddly tactile language, and finding the hidden chambers that house the golems until you arrive. Very much a quest where enjoying the journey is a deliberate element. Assuming that the player did in fact explore the region thoroughly before this point, they now have 3 options for caves. The Island Cave near Dewford Town, the Desert Ruins in the desert, and the Ancient Tomb between Fortree and Lilycove. However, as with every step so far, it's not that simple. Each of these has an individual puzzle that needs to be solved before the player can actually battle a Reggie. I particularly like that the puzzle depends on which game you are playing. If you played Ruby in 2004, for example, and then played Emerald in 2005, and tried to solve the puzzle in the Island Cave in exactly the same way, it would not work, as they changed the solutions for the new Emerald version. You need to bust out your non-North American braille cipher and figure it out again. There's no muscle memory working here. The puzzles themselves are as strange and unintuitive as all the puzzles solved up until this point. They involve walking around a room in the big circle, using fly indoors, literally just standing still for 2 minutes, using flash in an already lit area, and walking in a specific path, then using strength or rock smash. These are very good checks against just guessing. They make absolutely certain that guess and check is not a possible way to solve these puzzles. I never in a million years would have guessed that I could open one of the doors by walking down 2 tiles, then left 2 tiles, and using strength. This is where the player finally gets their reward, battling one of the 3 Reggies. The feeling of excitement when the chamber door opens and you walk through is exhilarating, as you're confronted with a still, overworld sprite of something that looks more like a statue or a pillar than any Pokemon. And honestly, the Reggies are still some of the wildest designs to me, with their 7-dot braille face formations, elemental monolith bodies, and space sound effect cries. Their stat builds entirely maintain this theme, with all 3 of them being massive walls, true to their solid forms. Once you catch them, that's it. You've completed Pokemon's best legendary quest, and if you're anything like me, you are completely awed, slightly baffled, and wanting the same thing all over again anew. If I had to sum up this quest in one word, it would be esoteric. At every opportunity, the developers decided to make the requirements completely outlandish and bizarre, with maximum possible effect on the player. As a kid, this was the pinnacle of mystery and intrigue. I could not get enough of how awesome it was that you went through an underwater cave to read cryptic messages on a wall, used a seemingly random set of moves to unlock some doors, get stonewalled again, and then finally battle these golems. It was just unbelievable to me. I know that many others from my comments have said similar things about their experiences. That's all I had, folks. Did you use the braille cipher to manually decode the language in the sealed chamber? Or were you trapped in North America and forced to buy another book in order to understand? Or did you just look it up on game FAQs? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, it helps the channel out a bunch. I've been playing The Factory a bunch lately on Twitch, so give me a follow over there if you want to see that. Thanks for watching.